Alright, welcome back to my boss build series. I'm on Strand Warlock Broodweaver today, doing a threadling slash movement tech build. I don't know if you'd call it movement tech, but this is a very mobile build with the grapple grenade and the wanderer. With the wanderer, what that aspect does is it enhances your tangle so that it travels much further and more accurately, and I believe it tracks targets as well. But the main thing is that it goes far and it goes in a very straight trajectory, which means that you can move around the map like you can with no other build, basically. The only thing that's comparable to this as far as movement goes that I've seen is a unintended function of the game that people figured out how to exploit, which is well skating and shatter skating, etc. And not everybody can do that because it is not intended to work like that. A lot of people need to set up a macro to do it effectively. Well, look, this is just, you can do the exact same thing. It's way more fun, and yeah, this was intended by Bungie, so may as well make use of it. So as you can see here, I can get all the way over to this ogre and further if I wanted. I can grapple melee into the ogre. Keep in mind, if I landed that tangle on the ogre, like if the tangle hit the ogre would be suspended from the wanderer tangle, right? So not only does the tangle travel an insane amount of distance like that, but it also creates a suspending blast on when it's destroyed, right? It used to be, when it first came out, that you would have to throw the tangle in order to get the suspension. Shooting the tangle would not create a suspension, but now they made it so that you can either shoot it or you can throw it. It doesn't matter. It's always going to create a suspending burst. So basically your tangle is now a shackle grenade. And with the addition of Mind Spun Invocation as the second aspect for Warlock, now your grapple is a threadling grenade, because a standard threadling grenade is 3 threadlings that you can throw. And a Mind Spun Invocation grapple grenade has 3 threadling grenades emerge from the hit, from the grapple melee hit. So, whenever we are grappling onto our tangle and traveling long distances and landing it on an enemy, we are going to suspend the target, and if we grapple melee them, we're going to spawn 3 threadlings. And with the addition of swarmers as the exotic armor for my boots, every tangle is going to also produce 2 more threadlings. And another feature of the Wanderer is that the threadlings actually produce more tangles for you. Threadling kills produce tangles, which is kind of good. But the thing is, it's kind of obsolete in this case because swarmers already give your threadlings the additional function of unraveling enemies. So it means that no matter what type of threadling you are getting, whether it's from a threadling grenade, as an ability, as we know, strand abilities in general produce tangles, right? So a threadling grenade would produce tangles no matter what. But if you're making threadlings from, I guess, a fragment, like finality or whatever I can't remember the names of all the fragments that produce tangles, or threadlings, I should say. But you are going to get tangles from any type of threadling kills with the Wanderer. So even if it's like hatchling on your weapon, right? So that's kind of cool, which means that you could use the Wanderer and you can use a build like this without swarmers. But I'm using swarmers because it just enhances that whole grapple melee, tangle, movement ability that I have with the fallout of the destruction. So I'm going to have suspension, I'm going to have long distance travel, threadlings that unravel, and lots of threadlings, right? So you can think of every time I throw my grapple and throw my tangle and grapple, the end result is going to be a suspended enemy that has 5 threadlings unraveling it and destroying it. And then I will get more tangles. So if you're playing the build correctly, then you basically want to have your grapple up all the time, which you can do just by grappling onto your tangle. If you miss your tangle, then obviously you got to wait for your grenade cooldown, which isn't a big deal. And every now and then I will grapple into a pack of enemies, like at the initial onset of the fight, because I know by the time I'm done killing that pack of enemies with Thread of Generation, which is the fragment that gives you grenade energy when damaging enemies, by the time I'm done killing that group of ads, I'll probably have my Tangle cooldown, which is 12 seconds, right? They buffed that as well, so now Tangles cool down on a 12-second timer instead of 15 seconds. So yeah, I can just plan it so that I finish my fight with the enemies before I have to move on to the next point at the 12-second mark or later, so that I can have a tangle by the end of the fight, and my grapple grenade will likely be back from all the damage, and then I can move from that point to the next point with my next tangle and my grapple melee, right? But yeah, ideally you want to only be using your grapple when you have a tangle to latch onto. So what else am I using here for this build? I'm using a couple staple fragments that I use on pretty much all of my Strand builds, especially for endgame if I'm trying to solo anything or do like master raids or master dungeons or GMs. I'm gonna take advantage of woven mail. Even on Warlock, Warlock has the least amount of access to woven mail and sever, which are the two, basically damage resistance effects that you can get out of Strand. Titan and Hunter have their bases covered with their various aspects and exotics that they have for Strand, but Warlock doesn't. Pretty much everything on Warlock is designed around threadlings and unravel. So it's quite unique in that sense, but you can still use Thread of Warding, so that when you pick up orbs you get 10 seconds of woven mail, even though orb regeneration or orb production got nerfed quite heavily, you're still making plenty of orbs with this build, so that you can basically have uptime on woven mail at all times if needed. Woven mail did get nerfed. I think it's a 40% damage resistance now, which is still good. It's still among the best damage resistance that you can get in the game from a subclass effect. And then Sever got a huge buff, and you can use Sever on Warlock as long as you're using Thread of Isolation, or if you're using a weapon that severs, like the Navigator. But Thread of Isolation is quite good on any type of Broodweaver build, because it allows you to produce tangles whether you're using a Strand weapon or not. In this case, obviously, I'm using Strand weapons with lots of Strand stuff going on, so tangle generation is not an issue. But Thread of Isolation would allow you to use no Strand weapons at all. And as long as you land precision hits with any weapon, you will sever the target. When the target is severed, they're doing 40% less damage to you. So, stack woven mail with sever, and you're getting a ton of damage resistance from specific enemies that you've severed. So Thread of Isolation is very good for this. So I'm using 2 of my fragment slots to basically get 2 of the most important Strand effects, which is Sever and Woven Mail. Now, if you're doing lower end stuff, or if you have a fire team to cover you, then maybe you can get away without using Woven Mail and Sever, but personal preference here is I just rather have it, especially because I'm trying to solo something here, for example. And even though this is the easier encounter and there's no boss, you know, it's just kind of an ad clear crowd control type of encounter, survivability can still be an issue here with all the moths and the solar grenades and all the arc. So yeah, I may as well use Woven Mail and Sever to my advantage, because a healing rift by itself is not really going to cut it here, because this is a move around the map as much as possible type of encounter, right? So if I'm going to use my rift, then I'm not really going to be in it for long or often. So and that's also why I'm not using Weaver's Call here, right? Because you could use grapple. You could use grapple with Mindspun Invocation to have 3 threadlings on your grapple hits, or you can use Weaver's Call and get basically a grapple grenade built into your rift, right? Because when you cast your rift, you get 3 threadlings. I didn't go with the rift option because I want movement, right? So you could do whatever you want, whatever suits the encounter, but I'm using this for this encounter, which is very movement based, and I'm also using this build for the traversal sections throughout the dungeon, right? Because often when I set up my loadouts to go into a dungeon, I'll do it beforehand, and I'll come up with a build that will be suitable for non-boss encounters like this one, right? So ad clear, movement, crowd control type stuff, and then I'll use that build for the traversal sections as well. You know, maybe with some weapon, change my loadout a bit with my weapons, but the build stays the same, like 95%. So yeah, so this was the build that I came up with to do my dungeon run this week in a fire team, and I realized how fun it was. Especially in this encounter, but even after this encounter, like just skipping by all the enemies with, you know, grappling onto my tangle, super fun. So then I thought, well, I mean, it's been a while since I made a video, I may as well do a build video on this, because this is one of the builds that I've probably been having the most fun with this season. So I decided to just come back into the dungeon solo and see how effective it is. And it's definitely effective. So back to the other fragments that I'm using here. Thread of Generation is pretty much in all of my Strand builds, because more grenade energy based off of damage done. It's very good. You're going to get your grapple back very fast if you lose it. You could go without it here. Grapple grenades already have a fast cooldown of 1:22. You know, with tier 10 discipline, even less so. And if you're grappling onto your tangles properly, then you're never going to be really without your tangles. So if you want, you can go without Thread of Generation and maybe use like Thread of Continuity, so that you can increase the unravel duration and the suspend duration, right? Because your tangle is suspending as well. So you could use Continuity instead of Generation. And the last fragment that I'm using here, which is a no-brainer for any threadling type of build that you're doing, you should always have on Thread of Evolution. That's going to increase the amount of damage that your threadlings do, and it's going to increase their travel distance, and I think it probably tracks enemies more aggressively. Yeah, look at this tangle throw here. I almost get all the way back to the ritual area. So yeah, pretty cool. And as far as the seasonal artifact mods, I'm using Horde Shuttle and Unraveling Orbs. So I don't really need to juice up my fragments as far as threadling production, because I've got so many threadlings just from the seasonal artifact and just from making tangles. Right, that's basically doing all the work. Combat mods, heavy-handed, because that's kind of a double whammy. My Arcane Needle and my Grapple Melee will produce Orbs of Power. I'm using 1 copy of Strand Weapon Surge for my Strand weapons, so they do 10% more damage, and Font of Focus for 100 Discipline. That's basically it. See you in the next one.